Welcome to the Great Plains Association for College Admissions Counseling Virtual College Fair. We're so excited to have you participating in this event. We have some fantastic schools here with us today. My name is Matt, and I will be your facilitator. Before we get started, a few housekeeping items. Your camera and microphone are off, so the panelists cannot see or hear you. You can use the Q&A button on your screen to type your questions to our presenters at any time. And we do encourage you to check the schedule for more sessions that are happening as part of this college fair. The presentation is being recorded and will be available at strivescan.com/GPACAC. And now I'd like to turn things over to the moderator of this session, Amy.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're so excited that you're here. My name is Amy McQuaid, and I am the Associate Director of College Counseling and Registrar at Cassidy School in Oklahoma City. And we are very excited to be able to host this session, What I Wish I Had Known. Many of you are probably either gearing up for the admissions process or in the middle of the admissions process, or it's off in your future somewhere. So we want to make sure we can cover as much information as possible and help you feel a little more confident in what you should be thinking about. So before we get started, one of the best things that's going to help us prepare and present the most useful information is to know who you are. So we have a poll. I'm going to go ahead and have Matt send that out to everyone. If you would answer who you are, tell us a little bit about where you are in high school, or if you're a parent or a family member. That way we know who's in the room and how to respond to certain questions. While you are responding to that poll, I want to go ahead and introduce our amazing panelists. They'll also reintroduce themselves. But we have Jennifer McClendon. Jennifer, if you want to wave. Jennifer is the Associate Director of Undergraduate Admissions at Oklahoma State University. We also have Amanda Booth, who is the Director of College Counseling at Wichita Collegiate School. And then with us today, we have Nicholas Sayeg, who is a current student at Oklahoma City University. Hopefully between the three of them, we will be able to give you a really well-rounded view of the college admissions and search process. All right, Matt, can we go ahead and see the results of that poll? So it looks like we have a freshman, a few juniors, a few seniors. We even have a transfer student. Thank you for being here. And then we have a few parents as well. So it is a mixed bag in the room. We love it. Hopefully you all will leave with some really useful information. But without further ado, just so we stay on time, I want to kick it into our first question. Amanda's going to share her screen. But our first question this afternoon is, where do I start in the college admissions process? And Amanda is going to go first.
I apologize, I'm having technology issues here, so I'm going to try to present and unmute myself again. So
if we can't screen share, Amanda, let's just move on. We'll just go ahead and present without the PowerPoint. No worries.
Fabulous. Are you still seeing my screen?
We do not see your screen at all. We just see your beautiful face.
Okay, fabulous. So the first question is, where do I start? And, in my role as a college counselor, I often ask my students when they come in our college counseling office is, why do you want to go to college to begin with? What is your end goal, and what do you hope to accomplish by continuing your education or exploring your post-secondary options? So while it seems very basic, I think it's really important to start there. And the next tip of advice I would give you would be, what are your strengths? I think knowing yourself as a student, and for our parents on the webinar today, what are your students' strengths? What are they good at? I think knowing those up front really can help shape your college search process. Because say, hey, I'm a self-starter. Well, that might help shape your college list of, I know I can be in a lecture hall of 300 people and I'm going to feel empowered to talk to my professor after class in that environment, while others might go, oh, that is not a strength of mine, and I might not feel so confident in that ability of myself. I would say, knowing your values and really what's important to you. I think we'll circle around more on that thought in a bit, but what's important to you, and again, what's your why? would be my pieces of advice of where do I start.
All right. Everyone, can you see my screen? I tried to help Amanda out here. Okay, so that worked. So piggybacking off of what Amanda started with, I think a big part of sort of your next steps are knowing what your options are. And that ranges between a technical or a trade school to looking at the military, several options there, whether it's a military school or starting with the military and returning to school afterwards, or looking into a 2-year community college or going straight to a 4-year college. So there's lots of different options, various paths, and no one is right or wrong. It's all about the best fit for you. The best ways to sort of explore those options too are really to attend college visits when you can. All of our colleges have tons of on-campus programming throughout the year. And thanks to COVID too, we actually have several different virtual events. And so I know specifically OSU will do an in-person event and then a virtual event as well of typically the same program. And we're seeing that as a national trend. And so that's been a big perk of this, is from the comfort of your own home like this, you can start exploring and doing that process as well. Several of you also may be fortunate enough to have different virtual search options like Naviance or Score that your high schools are using. Another one that's really popular for students too is the College Board Big Future Search engine as well. And so those are some great ways to really get started on this.
Thank you. This next question is for Nick. Nick, what was the most surprising part of the college admissions process for you?
Thank you, Amy. So the most surprising part of the college admissions process for me was just getting in and understanding how many moving parts there are at the same time. Because like from freshman to about junior year, people just talked about this college process that I've never heard about. I'm a first generation student, so I had no idea what was going on. And then once I actually entered my senior year and I started hearing about like turning in your test scores, applying to colleges, looking at colleges, college visits, the college essay, like it all just got jumbled up in my head. And I really was shocked to see how much that students have to go through to be able to get a higher education. But to drill down a little further, what actually shocked me the most was how difficult it was to write a college essay. Because like high school students, we go through about 17, 18 years of our lives developing this great story, all these life experiences that then we're pretty much asked to put in about 650 words on a piece of paper that will determine where we go to college. Right. And I know a lot of students right now, all of you are definitely either thinking about that process or going through the process of writing a college application and turning it in. It's probably the most daunting part of the whole thing. But I think that I expected like standardized testing to be the most difficult part of it. Definitely the essay caught me off guard. It definitely made me a better writer after the whole college process, but that was what surprised me the most.
Thank you, Nick. And this next question is actually for both Amanda and Nick. I'll have Amanda start. But what are the most common mistakes students make in the college search and admissions process? And Nick, when it gets to you, what were some of the mistakes that you almost made or that you did make that you wish you could go back and redo? But we'll start with Amanda.
Well, Nick actually set my advice up perfectly, actually. So researching schools and understanding what is required of you in each application process. What I wish there was is a universal process, but that does not exist. So oftentimes my answers are, well, it depends, because it is very, very different for every single school of what they're going to require of you to apply and to support your application processes. And as Nick mentioned, those college essays, the personal statements, and even the supplemental writings that why my school or why engineering at my school, you really have to dive into researching the school and understanding why you want to go to that school and then articulate it. So the writing does take quite a bit of your time, and the resume and an involvement piece also can go into application processes. So that would be my tip, is research, understand why you're applying to those schools and what is needed by each school, because it will be very different. And then oftentimes students will start running out of time. So find your deadlines and work backwards. I think that's a great tip for organizing your time. I think another piece of advice is stay true to yourself in this process. Everyone is going to college for a different reason, or maybe to post-secondary option for a different reason. So stay in your lane and try not to compare yourself to your friends or your family. This is a very, very individual process, and you should treat it as such. And so just kind of stay in your lane and stay true to yourself. My last tip of advice is on a mistake is students, I think, oftentimes rely on the name brand of the school or the rankings. Oh, they're on a top 100 list. It has to be the perfect school. Well, it's likely a good school because, hey, there are no bad schools out there. I want to debunk that myth. There is not a bad post-secondary option out there for you. What is not right is it may not be the right school for you. So I leave you and I'll toss it over to Nick.
Yeah, that was definitely great advice that I wish I had when I was going through the college process. But the most common mistake that I see, like in students, and also I definitely did this too, was just not giving myself enough rest, like both mentally and physically. So I know like the college process is super daunting, especially like outside of just the writing the college essay, like we have to worry about scholarships and resume. Amanda touched on some of that, like the involvement aspect. You know, sometimes seniors in high school will find themselves working like up to like 4 a.m. on assignments for class because we also have to balance being a senior in high school with the college process. And definitely no student is able to function at their peak if they're not getting enough sleep. I think that definitely taking care of yourself physically is very important, even through college for the rest of your life. I think that's a huge tip that I have taken from the college process because I definitely did not, could have done better on that. But also mentally, taking care of yourself and just, I know Amanda definitely touched on this, like just, it is such an individual process. And once you start comparing your college process to someone else's, things can start going south pretty fast. You're like, oh, why am I not doing this? Like all of these people are doing, or like my best friend's doing this. Why am I not? But I definitely went through that as well. And I think that imposter syndrome is also an aspect of the college process where you feel like maybe I shouldn't apply to this college because I won't get in. I definitely went through that as well. And I think that all ties into like mental health, taking care of your mental health and physical health throughout this whole process, because that is definitely the most important thing.
I would also add that this is almost like a second class or another class in your senior year. So if you have a study hall, it might be a nice break and some time to work on those applications.
Those were great tips of advice. 1 star or pro tip is seniors, it's not too late, but start early. You can start as early as the summer before, as far as getting your deadlines into a spreadsheet, creating a calendar for yourself, creating time and space for yourself to work on some of these things like your essay that takes time and energy, creating your resume. So definitely take time to do that. And seniors, it's not too late. If you're working through applications right now and you feel overwhelmed, take an hour for some self-care and just literally put all of your thoughts on the paper, put all of your things that you're worried about, put all of your deadlines in one place, just to make yourself feel a little more organized and feel like you've got it, because chances are you are further along than you think you are. So this next question is for Nick, and that is, what is one thing you would have spent more time on in the application process?
Yeah, thank you. So during the application process, I talked about this earlier, but definitely would have spent more time like refining my college essay and getting it proofread by different faculty at my school and in my community. But part of the application process is like for a lot of universities, like what is your volunteer experience? And I definitely wish I would have gotten involved earlier, but also through the senior year, not stopped like getting engaged in my community during the college process, because it definitely does take up time like a class. You know, you're writing, you're reading, you're researching, and I think it just eats up so much time that we forget that other things are definitely going on. But for sure, making sure that college essay is as clean and as perfect as it can be before you submit it. I think that a lot of us feel like we can rush towards the end, like how we do in class. You know, it's not really like an English assignment where you can write it the night before. I think that it's definitely something that should be worked on over at least the entire fall semester. If you plan on applying early or applying later in your senior year, definitely like multiple drafts, multiple different essays, and I would recommend not sticking with one essay. Like say you draft your first essay, you don't have to stick with that. I definitely scrapped like 2 or 3 drafts of my essay and completely changed course. And here I am, a college student surviving. So the college process is definitely doable regarding the essay part, but that's what I would do differently and spend more time on.
Awesome, thank you. And I know some of you are starting to throw questions in the Q&A. Please do so throughout our presentation. We're going to go ahead and hit that Q&A at the very end because we may actually answer some of your questions along the way throughout our panel. So we appreciate your patience, but as you think of questions, just throw them in there. Don't be afraid or feel like you have to wait until we say it's time for Q&A. Go ahead and ask those questions. Our next question is certainly a huge buzz right now in higher education. What is test optional? And I know seniors, you're in the middle of this and trying to figure this out. Juniors, you're going, but nobody has made a decision for my year. So both Jennifer and Amanda are going to respond to this. So we're going to start with Jennifer for the college perspective.
All right. I want to try and succinctly sort of address what test optional is as best I can. And really, we kind of have the pandemic to thank for this. And so that's sort of another silver lining of this is that when testing was restricted this last year, it really forced a lot of us on the college end to do something that we've been toying with and wanting to do for a while. And that's really reconsider how test scores are used in the college admissions process. And so you'll find that this definition may vary institution to institution. So it's a very good idea to make sure you do your research. But typically test optional means that you as the student have the choice as to whether or not you would like to submit your test score for consideration for admission and scholarships. Sometimes those two things are different. You can submit them. You can be admitted as test optional for admission. Maybe you take a test score later and submit it, and they can consider that for scholarships. That's going to change on each institution. Then you'll also see something called test blind. And so there are several institutions that are also test blind. And a good example of this would be the University of California system that does not use test scores at all. And so they're just looking at other parameters to measure a student's ability to succeed within their school. And so that's one of the things there. A couple of tips sort of that go along with that is really to, most schools will publish a mid 50% an average test score. And so a couple of things to keep in mind when you're looking at those. Number one, those are typically very skewed at this point because it's all contingent upon how many students are submitting test scores that have been admitted or applied for scholarships within that class. And so that's a great question to answer. Most of us can tell you from the institutional end, you know, if it's about 50-50, half of our students are coming in test optional, half of them are submitting test scores. And in thinking about that too, typically the students that are submitting those test scores or choosing to do so when you have that as an option tend to be students on the higher end of the spectrum. And so sometimes that mid 50% is much higher than what the school will admit. So don't ever self-disqualify yourself from an admission standpoint for that reason. The other part of this too is to consider is really think through what the regular student profile looks like at that institution. And so say you have a 27 on the ACT, it's a fantastic test score. And depending on what institution you're applying to, that could be an average score, that could be a very high score, or that could be a score that may or might not even be admissible. And so having some really great conversations with your college counselors, as well as your admissions counselor at your schools, can help you make some suggestions about whether or not you should consider submitting test scores. Sometimes when you submit test scores, it may make you eligible for some scholarship opportunities that may not be eligible for students that don't submit test scores. An example of this is at OSU, some of our most competitive scholarships still require that test score component. And so just having those open lines of communication, talking with your admissions counselor about that, they can help guide you in the right direction too. And of course, your fabulous college counselors in your schools can also do the same too. And if they don't know the answer, they typically have a contact that can help you determine that as well. Amanda, what would you add?
I think you covered that pretty comprehensively. Again, it's a very individual process, so blanket information is difficult in sometimes these contexts. So Jennifer, I think you provided some excellent advice on how your test score might compare to that of that individual institution that you might be considering applying to. I would say just get to know your admissions counselors. On the college side, every single college has an area or a territory or certain high schools that professionals are working with, like Jennifer. They're very friendly people who want to help you and provide advice. So use those admission counselors and say, hey, I'm not sure if I want to submit that test score or not. They're really great advocates for students and guide you through this process. In addition to scholarships, some academic programs may not be test optional on college and university campuses. So, for example, the university might be test optional, meaning you can be admitted to the university without a test score. But hey, that nursing program actually might require a test score. So again, diving in, knowing what you're getting into and using your resources is certainly some best advice.
Thank you all. I know test optional is really complicated and some of you may still have questions. Thank you to those of you who are throwing questions in the Q&A. If you still have questions about testing, please go ahead and throw those in there and we'll get to those at the end. But our next question is really for everyone. What should students focus on right now? And this is probably going to be different for each one of you, right? We have freshmen in the room, we have sophomores, we have juniors, we have seniors, we have parents, we have a transfer student. So the answers are certainly going to be diverse, but our hope is to at least give you a next step. So we'll start with Amanda and then Jennifer will add in.
Fabulous. Thank you, Amy. Yeah, as Amy mentioned, this is not universal advice because depending on where you're at in this process, it's going to be specific, but hopefully we'll give you some pro tips here. So I would say engaging in school and maximizing your opportunities would be a place to start, right? Using your resources, focusing on your academic performance, finding leadership or activities, clubs, organizations that you're really excited about really is a place of focus, right? Making sure that you are a happy, healthy, balanced high school student and excelling where you are at in this process is important. I would say freshmen and sophomores, for you, my advice would be, hey, this is a fun time. And just being here today, you're starting this process off on the right foot because you're going to learn about different colleges, you're getting pro tips. So continue to do your research, continue to know what your strengths are and what's important to you. Juniors, I would say it's probably the most pivotal year for you to dive deeper and start looking at the schools and understanding how your personal values align with that school and start shaping that college list. As Mrs. McQuaid mentioned, that, hey, some of these applications open the summer between before your senior year, so maybe July or August. So shaping that college list and having an idea of what's important to you and where you might apply is a great place for you or something for you to start thinking about as a junior. Our seniors, just keep swimming, keep using your resources, go see your college counselor or your career office at school, and just try to stay organized. But I think there's plenty more advice from Jennifer and Nick on this front.
Fantastic. Thanks, Amanda. So I'm going to address the transfer student in the room real quick too. And this is good advice for anyone that's considering maybe even taking a class or two at your local community college before you start at school, or in a summer, maybe when you're home. But a lot of our colleges will use some sort of transfer equivalency tool. And it's usually a tool that's housed on our website where you can enter in the coursework and the institution of where you're taking classes. And typically they can spit out what kind of credit you will actually receive at the institution you're planning to attend. And that's a great way of really kind of determining what credit you can bring in. Some of these tools will also allow you to do that with AP credit or any concurrent classes or dual credit courses too. So just know that that's another tip out there too. For my students that are still in high school, I think one of the biggest pieces of advice I could give you too is focus on your GPA. In this test optional world that we're in right now, your GPA is very important. Now that doesn't mean you all need a 4.3 GPA and that's the only way you're going to get into college. We just like to see on the college end that you're putting in some effort and you're doing your best and you're trying your hardest. And usually, sometimes, there's bumps along the road your freshman or sophomore year, but seeing those increasing trends in a GPA are usually a really great indicator of student success in college too. And lastly, the other component of this too is that college is a time that's really a shift to self-advocacy. And so what that means is in college, you're the one that's going to step up. And when you need help, when you need tutoring resources, when you need to connect someone on a disability services standpoint, it's deadlines, things like that, it's on you as a student to move forward with that. And that tends to be a shift for students in high schools, because in high school, typically your teachers are kind of nudging you along. It's the reminders of the upcoming test, it's, reminders of things that are due. It's pointing you in the right direction when maybe your grades dip or something like that. And so it's a good idea to start practicing sort of that own self-advocacy and responsibility when you're in high school. You still sort of have that safety net so that there's not as many bumps along the road when you move on to college.
Thank you all. We hope that was certainly helpful. One follow-up question that I want to bring in the mix is we've mentioned values a few times in this panel, and I know some of you might be thinking, but what are my values? And so I would love for Amanda to speak to that. And then Nick, if you have any thoughts on what you learned about yourself or how you learned about yourself in the process and what you valued, feel free to throw those in, not a requirement.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And values can really lead the way in the college search. So for example, if I ask a classroom full of students, what's important to you? I usually hear a mix of family, friends, faith, extracurricular involvement, hiking sometimes, or whatever is important to you. So say your family is important to you. Well, how would that shape your college search? I would say, do you want to stay close to home? How far away are you willing to be away from your family? Is that an hour drive? So maybe you can come home and have mom do your laundry every couple weeks, or maybe catch a Sunday dinner, or it's important for you to stay near home to catch your siblings' athletic games or their plays and continue involvement in your immediate family's life? Or is that a flight away, right? So is it an easy nonstop flight for you to go back home? I also say is if family is a value and it's very important to you, well, hey, do you have family in Boston that you feel comfortable going to Boston because you'd have a built-in network there? So that might be one example of how you can take something important to you and really start tackling a college search. Another example I ask, or say faith is important to you. Well, is there a mosque or a temple, or what faith-based activities are on campus? What is in the community or nearby that you can see yourself involving in to bring yourself meaning and purpose? So that's, I guess, how I would tackle, or some tips to tackle how your values can shape your college search.
Yeah, that's definitely great advice. And I know through the college process, I definitely learned a lot about myself. And then once I got to college, I continued learning about my values. But throughout the college process, it definitely takes you have to take some time for yourself to understand like what's really important to you. Like Amanda mentioned, family, like that made a huge decision in my college process because I'm from Oklahoma City. So I'm 10 minutes away from college. I can drive home and pick up stuff I forgot, go see my mom and my dog. That's what's most important to me. And that made a huge decision, or that helped me make the huge decision of what college I wanted to go to. I think also values can play into like what you're, especially for freshmen through juniors, like what you're involved in through high school can kind of shape your values. Like if you're a musician, being in band and choir, and what you really want to envision your future career, and then applying that to the college process by centering yourself around your values to get yourself into college, and then further yourself in your career, your professional and personal life. Values are something that does not come easy to search for. It definitely takes a lot of time, and it's absolutely okay if you're unsure of what any of your values really are. I mean, we definitely have them, but it does take a lot of time to uncover them and really apply them to the college process.
Thank you too for hopping in on that. Hopefully that was enlightening for many of you and started you thinking on what really brings joy and meaning to your life and how that might impact your college search or application process. This next question, what is most overlooked in the search and application process? And I think this is a really important one, especially for seniors. It's really easy to get caught up in the little details and sometimes miss places where we think, oh, that's easy. I don't have to spend much time on that. But we're going to go ahead and start with Jennifer, and then Amanda will wrap this question up.
So hopefully a phrase you're going to hear sort of throughout this process is a focus on fit. And what does fit mean? And really, I think on both sides of the proverbial desk in terms of the college admission side as well as the high school counselor side, we're all just trying to help students and families figure out the best fit. And so there's a variety of ways of doing this. But I think just like Amanda sort of alluded to, you're going to be there for 4 years. And so where are you going to be happiest, healthiest, and going to grow? I had a quote of someone that I follow who has a podcast earlier this week, and I want to share it with you real quick because it's really just sort of stuck with me all week. And it says, "There's no such thing as a best school or a best job. There's only the best fit for your values and goals." There's that word again. "Status signals the reputation of an institution, but it reveals nothing about what your life will be like there. Outer prestige is rarely a justification for inner misery." And so really what that sort of says is, regardless of what other people think about the school, whether it's your parents' alma mater, or whether your best friend's going to school there, or it's just this perceived best school because it's an Ivy League school or whatever, it doesn't mean that it's going to be a great fit for you. And so these things will depend on whether or not, how far away from home do you want to be? Are you okay if it's a plane ride, or do you need to be within a car drive to be home? And really think through those things, what that's going to be like, and where you're going to grow best, because that's the biggest part of that too. One of the things that is a catchphrase that Amanda shared with me that she heard from a parent one time says, "Don't choose a college for the sweatshirt." And so you can always wear the sweatshirt regardless of whether or not you go there. How many of us do that for sports teams and things like that we're a fan of? But it doesn't mean that you actually have to choose that college. And so find some different schools to look at, get on campus. There's lots of different virtual campus tours that you can experience too if you don't get to go right away. But the best way to determine fit is to really be there and see what it's like to experience that as a student. Amanda.
Yeah, I love the sweatshirt. I mean, you can always wear a sweatshirt, right? Today's a great day for a sweatshirt if you're here in the Midwest. I'd love to get into one really soon. But I think ignoring the concept of fit, and something to rephrase fit is, where will you, students or parents, your student, be happy, healthy, and can see themselves thriving? And I think ignoring that gut feeling is a kind of a cough, is overlooked in this process. I would say relying on rankings, back to my initial advice, and peer influence is definitely something that can be overemphasized at times. And I talked about supplemental writing, not giving yourself enough time to stand out in those college specific writing essays. Many times students will focus all their time and energy on the big 650 word personal statement that may be required, and only allow themselves a week or a few days to write those supplemental essays. And really, the colleges may be looking at those supplemental essays a little bit more closely, if they're required at all, than the personal statement. So make sure to give yourself time to look through the applications and plan your time accordingly.
Thank you all. And one thing I would add into the values conversation and what's overlooked is really being aware of how you learn best, being thoughtful about the kind of learning environment where you feel most engaged. And you might be thinking, well, how can I do that? Well, you can do that tomorrow at school. Start just over the next 2 weeks, paying attention to when you feel most engaged, if it's subject matter, if it's when you get to engage with your faculty member, when you get to engage with your peers, or when it's a really awesome lecture and story that just has you enthralled. Be mindful and let that also influence some of the schools that you might consider in your process. So this next section, we're going to transition more into helping you start to think about really important aspects of the search process. And the first one is finding balance. And Amanda and Nick are going to take this.
Nick, I'll let you chime in first on this one.
So definitely, it's been mentioned before, but definitely making sure and that's on the PowerPoint as well, because it's very important, understanding your deadlines. So there's not going to be one deadline for every college you're applying to, every scholarship you're applying to. They're going to be all over the place. I remember whenever I was in high school, I definitely kept track of them all on a spreadsheet. I had the college and the scholarships all listed out, early deadlines, regular deadlines. I think it's definitely important to give yourself time to meet those deadlines, and starting early, I think, will help you be able to balance your senior year if you're not already there. Seniors, if you're there now, it's not too late to start. Even structuring future deadlines, because they're going to go through until you graduate high school. I definitely think that a lot of the advice that's been given today can really help to balance, because it's definitely managing, keeping your GPA up, because again, you're still a student in high school. While also working through the college process and taking care of yourself. And then anything else you're involved in, because I'm sure seniors, you're definitely, hopefully involved in a lot of activities. And if you're not a senior, definitely looking at getting involved, or maybe you already are. I think extracurriculars are something that eat up all of the extra time, and students find themselves not being able to balance everything because there's so much that high school students are forced to balance as part of the college process, but especially through the college process, taking time and planning ahead, making sure you're managing everything and staying on top of stuff.
Thank you, Nick. One of my tips and speaking points here in finding balance is how many colleges is enough to apply to. That was in our chat. So I'll go ahead and answer that live now. And that ties into finding a balanced application list and really ties into the why as well. So I have students who apply to one school. They know they've wanted to go to that school for a really long time. It fits them academically, socially, emotionally. It fits the family budget. And they apply to that one school and are admitted. Now, other students, it depends on the selectivity of the school. So if you are applying to historically more selective college or universities, you might have to cast your net a little bit wider, because getting admitted to a school with a 4 to 15% acceptance rate is a bit of a gamble. You may be academically qualified, you may align with their mission, and really be a great, again, that word fit at that institution, but they can only admit so many students into their incoming class each year. So really finding a balance. Also, balance application list is sometimes you're going to run out of time and you're going to become burnt out. I have many seniors with November 1 deadlines coming up next week who simply have run out of time, and they've had to trim their list and be more intentional about prioritizing the schools that they know are going to, again, fit them academically. They're going to thrive socially, emotionally, and it's a great financial fit for their family. And I always ask students before they apply to a school or add a new school to their list, I often challenge them in a positive way, of course, and ask them why. Open-ended questions are a little bit scary, but if an answer is, my parents want me to, okay, maybe not the best answer of why to apply to that school, right? Oh, it's a high-ranked school. Probably, again, not a great reason to apply. You really need to dive in to your research, understand how, again, you can be happy and healthy at that institution before you take that time and energy and invest yourself in those application processes.
Thank you. And then Jennifer is going to wrap things up with some pro tips for success.
All right, so we've tried to kind of succinctly summarize a few of the sort of key takeaways for today. And so hopefully these will give you some things to move forward with. Of course, we mentioned values in here. I think that's often a hard one for us to think about. And so hopefully you'll start thinking about that today. I loved Amy's advice of thinking through where you're most engaged at school. I wrote it down. I'm going to use it. So think through that too. I think that's really helpful. The other part of this, I think, to keep in mind is that you as the student are the one that's going to college. And so for my parents in the room, encouraging your students to take ownership in this process and It doesn't mean that you're not a part of it. It doesn't mean that you can't ask questions, but encourage your student to do those things so that they can advocate for themselves. There's space for everyone to be a part of it, but it always kind of makes me laugh when I talk to a parent who tells me, we are taking AP English this year. And, how's it going for you, Mom? So just encouraging your student to take some ownership with it. And that's going to set them up for success next year too, when they go to college or whenever the time is that they're going off on their own there too. Another little tip I have too is, just like Amanda said, treat this as an extra course. And in my mind, that means it's an extra binder or a notebook, things like that. Keep all of your college stuff in there. Sometimes I've heard of students opening up a special email address just for your college. All of the emails that we send out and notifications, things like that, be sure to check those things regularly, because when you go off to school, that's the primary way that colleges are going to communicate. And if you're not checking those things, you're likely missing out on scholarship opportunities and financial aid and things like that. So really just sort of treat it as sort of a separate thing there too.
Great. Thank you. Nick, do you have any pro tips from the student perspective? You're very, very close to the admissions process, closer than the three of us other panelists are.
Yeah, I do have a few tips. So my first tip for the admission process would be to center. I kind of mentioned this earlier, but kind of once you find your values and what you want to focus on, whether it's a professional career or a hobby, focus a lot of your involvement in high school around that. So my involvement was in volunteerism. So I definitely got involved in volunteer organizations, spent a lot of time in my community, and then I'm able to present all of that during my admissions process, which shows them that I'm very heavily volunteering, and that's what got me through the entire process. Instead of just being a little good at everything, I tried to make sure what I was a part of in high school was valuable to me and not trying to spread myself too thin, trying to be involved in every single thing that was brought to my attention. So I definitely was a lot of saying no. That was definitely hard for me in high school, to say no to opportunities that came up. And my second tip would be to definitely look into dual enrollment at the colleges you're interested in. I know Jennifer touched on this. I was a dual enrollment student. My high school was very generous and was able to provide that for me. Definitely look into that. I think that's an easier method than navigating the AP score transfer method. I was able to transfer semesters worth of credits to Oklahoma City University and be able to get a head start on my actual degree.
Great, thank you. And that's actually a really good segue into the remaining question we have. We've been answering Q&A questions either live or by typing an answer. So one of the questions was, how important is it to have honors classes and or AP classes on your high school transcript? Amanda and Jennifer, I know you both probably have thoughts. We have about 3 minutes. So if you each want to take a minute to wrap it up, that would be great.
I can start with this, but likely it's going to depend on the institution in which you're applying. And so when it comes to an institution like OSU that's considered selective, but not highly selective, we of course want you to take academically rigorous coursework, but you're not getting any extra credit for doing so. And so if you know that you're applying to schools that sort of fall into kind of this sort of category, then my best advice for students is make sure that you're taking those AP and honors courses in areas in which you're interested. So if you love language arts, then take AP Lang and Comp. For me, science is not my jam. So AP Bio, I would rather stick a fork in my eyeball. And so really just kind of think through where are you most engaged, and then engage in that coursework there too. And Amanda can probably speak to the more selective institution and students that are going on to look more at rigor and what that advice would be too.
Yeah, and I know we're running out of time, so I'll try to make it quick, but highly select institutions, some of them will not accept dual credit courses. The AP is a little bit more universal in the highly select admissions realm. Every college or university will post an AP transfer guide, so letting you know what score you need in a certain subject area to transfer it into the college or university. And often, as Jennifer mentioned, has a transfer equivalency guide, so you might be able to see on their website if some of your dual dual credit classes may transfer. From a high school perspective, I would encourage you to challenge yourself appropriately. We want you to succeed and excel in those classes. So there is a fine balance between maximizing your schedule with a high AP load or a high honors load, but the colleges also are looking at your GPA. So they're looking at the curriculum you're engaging in and how you're maximizing opportunities, but also how well you're succeeding. So make sure that you're finding a nice balance between both.
Thank you
Excellent.
all. We are out of time, so I'm going to let Matt wrap it up. Ooh. Lost one of my earbuds. I'm going to let Matt wrap it up, but we hope that this was helpful for you all. Please stick around for the remainder of the college fair. And thank you so much for coming today.
Yes, thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our presenters. What an informative session. We have a quick survey when this Zoom window closes. We'd love your feedback. We do encourage you to check out the programming that's happening later as part of this college fair in the next several hours. So please do check out the schedule on the website for all of that information. And you'll be able to find a recording of this session as well as all of the others from this college fair online at strivescan.com/GPACAC. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your evening.